Welcome to the Continuous Transformation Podcast, where spirit and science meet and creatively merge to give birth to the future. Disclaimer: high risk of life-transforming perspectives.
This is the best time to begin your continuous transformation process.
Your host is Advaitananda, a visionary, influencer, and scientist with a quantum physics background and more than 30 years' experience of yoga, tantra, and meditation practice and teaching. Is history repeating itself again? In today's episode, Sahajananda Porslund invites Advaitananda to revisit his upbringing in a communist regime. The striking similarities to what happens today with the rise of the thought police, woke brigades running wild in the streets, and censorship in the name of free speech are difficult to ignore. Can we afford ignorance in front of such evidence?
We should look into the history repeating itself. We have all the signs of a totalitarian regime, the likes of which we haven't seen yet, is installing worldwide. On the other hand, we have communication, we have an amount of people who are having the best conditions to awaken that is unprecedented. So, this kind of revelations, maybe they are extremely useful. So people to make correlations and start to see, wait a second, let's not repeat again the same lesson. Let's learn the lesson and move forward inside of our being and also as a consequence outside. Hello everyone, I'm Advaitananda and I welcome you to this podcast. Today I chose a topic that will raise some eyebrows. But in times when social compliance is religiously demanded, I consider this as a moral duty, as an exercise that we should constantly do to shift the perspective, to look at even our current daily life from other angles that reveal sometimes amazing gifts that we haven't noticed and sometimes amazing flaws or dangerous developments that we should be aware of. Looking at what happens today in our society, seeing the rise of the thought police, the woke brigades running rampant through the world, the social shaming that is crushing the individuals, the censorship in the social media that is done in the name of freedom of speech, which is an aberration, the double moral standards where what some people do is acceptable just because of their skin color and some debatable history lessons. All these make me wonder, is history repeating itself again? And of course, I want to explain a little bit here. I was born and raised in Romania, behind the so-called Iron Curtain. I've witnessed on the street, live, the 1989 events that were called by some the anti-communist revolution, by other people a stolen revolution. Anyway, I've been there seeing this wave that was sweeping East Europe and saw for a very brief moment the transition of power between the two systems. And in those brief moments, I could see things, I could understand aspects about our society that later on were again covered, buried deep underneath the fabric of our modern society. Many things happening today are not new, and this is the reason why I accepted this topic today. It was suggested by my guest today, and I accepted it because I have seen these things firsthand. I've studied them in the history lessons, and I've noticed that every time a totalitarian regime comes into place, the collective awareness, especially regarding the similar situations from the past, is covered by the extraordinary big noise that is made by social activists and by the wave of opportunists that are eager for a little public attention. In this way, every time I've noticed when a totalitarian regime comes into place, people seem to be completely oblivious about the past events that would show exactly what happens and what will follow. Today we see, I dare to say, the classic signs of the emergence of a totalitarian regime worldwide. The first step in order to prevent that is to raise the awareness of what happens, and in this respect, seeing that is not the first time, and seeing the amazing similarities that exist between the current events in the world and what happened in the last century and in the last century again, many people will start to wake up towards a reality that unfortunately is not looking pretty. I invited today to shoot the questions to help me in this journey, a friend and a person of many talents and interests, a teacher and practitioner of yoga and tantra. I invited today Sahajananda Porslund. Welcome, Sahaj.
Thank you.
Few words about my guest today. First of all, Sahajananda, or Sahaj as we call him, his friends, he developed a great passion for the tantric path, a path that is quite suitable for modern conditions, and on the other hand, an esoteric path. He has profound knowledge and practical insight. He's practicing this for over 20 years. And since the age of 21, he has been researching in the field of esoteric knowledge and ancient spiritual traditions on this planet. He's combined his informative research work with an in-depth practice of yogic and tantric methods, together with powerful forms of training in meditation. He's actually acknowledged by International Federation for Yoga and Meditation as a teacher in esoteric yoga and esoteric tantra, and also Sahaj is an acknowledged and authorized meditation teacher. He's teaching yoga, tantra, and meditation in Nata Yoga Center in Copenhagen and Stockholm, and he's participating in various festivals around Europe. He's actually one of the founders of the now a trendy social phenomena, which is called the Tantra festivals throughout the world. And he is also a tireless worker for community. He called himself a community builder. Sahaj is also having a master's degree in comparative literature and art studies at Copenhagen University, and a minor degree in Ideology. Interesting combination, I have to admit. Sahaj is also a DJ, and he is the founder of this Eco Trance Mystery Project, and also the host and the founder of the Copenhagen Conscious Talks, a talk show that started a few years ago, and it starts to grow today, especially for the needs. So this is my guest today. Thank you for coming, and maybe it will be interesting to share with our listeners, why did you choose this topic?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and this perspective, Ava. So my passion for this topic, which in my mind, it is called communism and fake revolutions. That's how I came about to formulate it. And we kind of both grew up with the communism kind of on our side of the Iron Curtain.
Yeah, we were both on each side.
Yeah. And today I will mainly focus on asking you questions also about that, how you grew up with the communism. But maybe it would be interesting for you to hear a little bit about how it was on the other side before we go in depth with that. Because for me, I was growing up with this romantics idea, as many young people you also see today, apropos history repeating itself, this romantics ideas about socialism and communism and the great communist leaders. And I had a group of friends, and we were very, let's say, active. First, we were more intellectually active, but it also became like a political activism.
Mhm.
And I spent some years in, let's say, that bubble of revolutionary thinking and political activism. And it was still, even though there was obvious there were some major crimes against humanity related with what happened in the east of Europe, there was still this romantic ideas, Che Guevara, wearing Che Guevara t-shirts. I went to Nicaragua and spent times with some old
Oh yeah,
Sandinistas
yes,
there.
I read about this episode in your life. You worked in Nicaragua.
Yeah, yeah. I worked there on the countryside in the mountains, and I met some wonderful people. And for me, that was, communism, because it was something which would set people free and bring togetherness and connection and doing stuff together, nobody being superior and all that stuff. But
Generous ideas, after all.
yeah, definitely. Um, I I was reading Aldous Huxley's, both The Brave New World, but he also had a less famous book, which was The Utopia, where he described the perfect world, which was very close to, let's say, an ideal communism. And for me, that was kind of that was my youth, my teenage years I spent in that. And then I got different other perspectives, but I must admit, remember the first time you told me about your experiences during Ceausescu's communist regime, and that was like a wake up call. It's like I realized, my God, you can really romanticize many things, but when you hear the real thing, the real stories, then it's a very different perspective. And that's what I would like to talk with you about and hear your experiences from, let's say, the life behind the Iron Curtain and under the Iron Curtain, because as you said, you lifted it up. And what we hear today about what happened during these years of Ceausescu is not, I mean, what you hear in the conventional history is definitely not what you have shared with me. So
no, definitely is not. And the danger is this mystification of that period, like any mystification of history, is allowing history to repeat itself. History repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons. And when we hide the lessons, definitely we have no chance to learn. We used to joke about groups like yours back then, because we heard that there are some people in the West who are fascinated by what we are doing here. And then we used to joke, instead of keeping those people away from us, we should give them 1 or 2 years of visiting. We should bring them here. We should give them scholarships here in our university, and they will go back cured. I mean, they will go back with a completely different view. We used to joke that because the communist regime was trying to keep all the attention away from the country, but we used to joke, yeah, on the contrary, if we want to get rid of this, just invite them here. They will run screaming after a while.
the best medicine.
The best medicine. Unfortunately, of course, there was different plans behind the curtain, but it is like that. The knowledge that we have today is unfortunately shaped in such a way that is serving certain extremely small views, I would say, very narrow perspectives. And because of that, those narrow minds and narrow perspectives that are created by those narrow minds don't realize that people are tending to repeat the same mistakes again and again. And that's the reason why I find extremely important this kind of talk today, because many of the things that I see happening worldwide today are the symptoms that we have seen starting. I didn't witness that personally in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, but I've seen my fair share of the results of the Bolshevism in my own country and in other countries, because I've traveled in the Eastern Bloc quite a lot, being with the national basketball team and other occasions, traveling around, and I've seen it firsthand. And what I hear and see today happening worldwide is reloading exactly the same extremism, the same messages as the communists, the same messages as the Nazis. And now, interestingly, we see a kind of joint forces of the extreme left and extreme right in a kind of a bizarre monstrosity that is combining what is worst of both.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what's that all about? This kind of mixture of extreme fascism and extreme leftism or radical leftism. It's very bizarre.
This is what we have seen before. This was always done like this. Always, in order to confuse people, you hide one side. You are on the left, you blame the right. You are on the right, you blame the left. While in reality, the bad things happen on the combination of both. And now we see that. Well, we see it if we learn the lessons. Otherwise, this is what we see. The left is blaming the right, extreme right and all that, and the right is blaming the left.
But maybe for people who don't have so much knowledge exactly about, you say, like history repeating itself, you could share with us some significant experiences from your childhood, teenage years, about like what happened in that time, and why is it that a scholarship in Romania in the 80s would have been a cure for a lot of romanticism?
For naivety, yes. First of all, I want to say that what I've noticed, also living here in Denmark for now almost 20 years, so I almost spent half of my life here and half there. And the half there that I spent was in the transition period between the two systems. So I've seen all the wires that appeared in the process of transition. Now the wires again are buried underneath of the societal building. But what I've seen is a very inaccurate description of what happened, for instance, during the 48 years of communism in Romania, which is almost a lifetime. We had a generation which was born and raised completely and have their life in communism. And I can tell you few elements that are, in my opinion, significant for today. First of all, it's a false idea that we have today that in communism, as well as in fascism and every other regime like that, the force behind it was an external force. We have this impression, when we think about fascism and Nazism, we have these images from the movies, which are wrong, with some soldiers with these German machine guns and with this cooking pot kind of helmets and running around and enforcing social order. That's not true. It was in some moments, but most of it was accepted and embraced by the people. In communism, I've been raised there and I saw it. The thought police did a very lousy job in their offices. The thought police was inside of the homes of every Romanian. Romanians were censoring themselves. We were talking about, before 1989, we were talking about the so-called drawer culture. So we were saying there are a lot of valuable manuscripts rotting in drawers, in different redactions, in different... Why? Because the censorship. And then 1989 came, And of course, what you would expect is a myriad of an explosion of culture, because now it's not suppressed anymore and it will come out. Well, honestly, what came out was quite poor. I mean, there was not so many manuscripts hidden in the drawers. There were a few, no doubt about it, but much less than the impression that censorship is so hard on everything. No, actually, self-censorship, I have to say, was way bigger than people say today, admit today. And the active censorship was actually in the beginning. It was in the 50s when it started a little bit, and it was enormous, that setting of the society, giving things for free to people who don't deserve it by their own work and by their own values. The ideas, for instance, that was cultivating in the 50s, that they were defavored, or what you call today, this idea of not be unprivileged.
Unprivileged, yes.
Unprivileged members of the society. This idea was cultivated way, way too much. I mean, of course, it's a generous idea, but it became a religion. It became something you cannot contradict. And this generated a wave of opportunists. Opportunists who started what? Cancel culture. I've seen cancel culture way before it appeared in the 20s, in the 2020s. yeah, I've seen cancel culture appearing and developing when I was born. I was born exactly after the first wave of cancel culture in Romania, where lots of very good professors in universities were wiped out just because their opinions don't align with the general impression. But they were not kicked out by some, some committee with a gun on their shoulder here. And no, they were kicked out by students and lame professors, people who never wrote something of value, but suddenly they make a career spotting what they call at the time people who are not a good citizen. Sounds familiar, isn't it? It's shocking. People
it sounds
who are
very
not,
familiar.
Yeah, it's like that's the reason why, honestly, even though I don't get much involved in these things, but I like the topic, the way you put it, and I accepted to talk about it because it's shocking, the similarity. I've seen it. And it's shocking also that people tend to forget. I mean, when I go back to Romania and I talk to friends and family, they are all in this new paradigm, and some of them are old enough that they can remember these things. And I am asking them, don't you remember? You've been through that. How can you do it again in one lifetime? I understand if you are reborn or something, but in the same lifetime. It's true, it's 30 years ago, but still, I mean, you can pick up a newspaper, you can pick up some notes that you did at the time and realize, look, this was you. So what I'm saying, it's very very different than what we are told. The general impression that totalitarianism is installed by external forces. Wrong. Is installed by an appetite that the masses have, and it's fed by irresponsible people who trigger it. This is what we see today. In order to use power, governments now, in order to get power which they lost, credibility they lost from people, they are using pressure groups. Pressure groups was the method of communists. Pressure groups was the methods of fascists and Nazis and all the totalitarian regimes.
The brown shirts.
Brown shirts. The black shirts in Romania in 1990, immediately after the so-called revolution, I was there on the street again when it was an invasion of black faces and black shirts. Nobody should think of any racism. We were all white, but they were black because they work in the mines. They were the miners. They were brought to Bucharest in numbers unbelievable, tens of thousands, like a regular army, trains and buses, invading the central of capital city, where what was happening? For weeks, the gathering of citizens were demanding that the new government is resigning because in the new government were all former communist leaders. So people wanted, hey, we didn't make a revolution in order for you to steal it. And it became more and more clear in few months after 1989 that actually certain groups of power and so on took over from the society, took over the power in an opportunistic way.
So the miners were brought in to disrupt that kind of resistance.
Exactly. And they were brought in, just like Black Lives Matter today, exactly behaving like that. And when different parties were complaining, newborn parties, because we didn't have parties before, we have Communist Party and so on. The newborn parties were complaining, their headquarters were devastated by this, we call it, interestingly, the Black Tide, which is very interesting. The Black Tide, because they were dressed in black. Of course, it has to do with esoteric symbolism and all kind of elements. They were dressed in black. They invaded the capital. And when asked to put order, the president, who, by the way, was a former communist leader, he was in the establishment for 40 years. Speaking of what we see today, United States, a guy from the establishment using pressure groups, and now claiming he whitewashed himself. Oh, I'm clean and I am so willing to do something. Well, for decades, or I don't know, 5 decades is Joe Biden. I don't recall now. Anyway, he's there before we were born. Yeah, and a person from the establishment claimed to be the one who is saving and using pressure groups. Well, I've seen that. In 1919, after the revolution, to secure, in the name of securing the achievements of people were beaten to death. I've seen that, I've witnessed that. Beaten to death on the street by their own people. And when asked to blame, the president gathered 80,000 miners on the stadium and have a speech you can find on the internet where he congratulates them to be the real modern citizen. And then when asked, but how did you allow that? They killed people on the street. And he said, people need to protest. We cannot stop that. We gained the right to protest with the blood of young people in December 1989. Well, sounds familiar.
So basically what you're saying is that there was the so-called resistance. When the Iron Curtains was lifted, there was not much manuscripts, meaning there was not much resistance activity in the people, but it was somehow already dispersed or annihilated by these forces.
It was inside us already. It was already inside. And that's the reason why it happens again. It happens to propaganda, the propaganda machines. People are saying, oh, propaganda machine is something that is so obvious. No, propaganda machine is, for instance, mainstream media today. It functions exactly like the Nazi propaganda machine by the book, by speaking. You can analyze exactly the features of propaganda machine that was described by Goebbels, like exactly, or the propaganda machine by the communism. I've seen it firsthand at work. And honestly, between what I hear, for instance, in CNN today and what you could hear in the communist time in the journals, there's no difference. I mean, of course, there's difference in names, different language, of course, and some minor external differences. But as a scheme of communication, they were using shaming, they were using pressure groups, they were never issuing absolute rules. No, in communism, rarely you have rules that you have to respect, otherwise they put you in jail like this. No, but you don't dare.
Because of the social shaming and...
Neighbors telling about their neighbors' what they are doing, and hey, he got these things. Maybe he got it illegal because he works from the fact that I've seen. We have kids in my group there where they get this shoes, sport shoes, Adidas. Adidas was producing in Romania extremely cheap shoes in a factory in Romania, and of course it was not very wide known because they were paying very little and so on. So it was a little bit of a deal like this. But the communists were doing such things. And then, of course, parents of these colleagues were working in the factory, and suddenly the kids go out playing with us with sport shoes, news, Adidas. I mean, you don't find that everywhere there in the shops in Romania. So you find the sport shoes produced for local market, which was much more poor. So these people were wearing Adidas shoes, and their parents were jailed. How did it happen? Not because because they stole from the factory 2 pairs of shoes for their kids. Yeah, the factory they are working in. But what people don't say, they say, "Oh, what a horrific system." Yeah, let me ask you something. Who did catch the parents? The surprise is the neighbors who were envious on the kid because they don't have shoes for their kids like that fancy, and kid came home and says, Johnny has this kind of shoes, and then the parents says, and his mother is working in that factory, they must have stole it, and then they went and reported.
My God, what a system.
But the system was not enforced. This is there was no law who was giving people the duty to go and report. There was no law about it.
So basically, people want this. They want this kind of mix of fascism.
In the human consciousness, at a certain inferior level, before you pass certain levels of autonomy, you need this kind of, let's say, almost abusive guidance. Unless, of course, you carefully develop the entire social fabric. And therefore, that's what I'm saying here. People were not forced at all. Another thing that I've seen, not at all. They were forced in certain directions, but much less that we care to admit today. Much less that we assume responsibility for. And this I've seen, and I've studied documents about Nazis, same. Bolshevism, the Soviet Union, 70-something years of very, very big chain of some amazing achievements, let's admit it, but some amazing stupid things and so on. But the combination of it is unfortunately not studied correctly because it's considered the whole hypothesis of an abusive system coming, I don't know, I was even wondering, these are countries that are at a planetary level important. So who was pulling the strings in a country like Soviet Union? I mean, that must be somebody much stronger above the Soviet Union. If you talk about Romania, you can say we were influenced by the Soviet Union, we share half of our border with. Correct. But when you talk about Soviet Union itself, who was pulling the strings? Some alien race or something, if you want to consider, because otherwise we have to study something deeper. Maybe it was addressing, if you press certain buttons on people, on society, you trigger similar effects no matter where you are and what culture you are into and what time you are into. And that's what I'm saying. Because we've seen these similar phenomena, even similar methods, almost spontaneously springing out again and again.
So actually, let's say if you know human psychology very well, and you want to control a society, you will not have to enforce many things. You just have to know how to formulate the things, so that, because also the language, as we see today, the gender language or the political language is it's like very extreme. You cannot, it's so political correct that you can hardly describe certain parts of reality anymore without getting shamed on social media or banned.
But listen, when communists came in place in Romania, again, take a first-hand experience, but that happened with Bolsheviks, that happened with the Nazis also, and other regimes. The first thing they did was to redefine terms. Sounds familiar? Fact. When Bolsheviks came in power in Soviet Union, they defunded police. When communists came in Romania in power, they defunded police and renamed it. They say it's not correct to call it police, it's militia, because militia is a term that is to the people, not to you, to police, my police. It's militia. It's something that is spontaneously springing out a kind of a social justice system. Social justice? I was shocked to hear same story that we read in the pamphlets of the Communist Party in its worst part of deviant tendency in Romania, to read it now as serious proposals in the American society. I mean, either all these people haven't read the book of history, haven't cared to read anything but some American journals, or something else, but I don't want to go into that direction yet. So, but these are similar. Renaming terms is a way to reshaping the concepts and the consciousness of the masses. And people accept it because they don't see where it goes. They have a consciousness that is too narrow as a perspective, so they can't see what's going on. Practically, they are hurdled, they are funneled towards a certain place where they will be exploited, basically, but they are hurdled gently, slowly. Yeah, all the communist regimes, they didn't come in place just like that. You know, in Romania, for instance, they started at some point. It took years. They were resisting groups fighting the militia, fighting their own people in the mountains, even 7 years later. And they were showing on TV how they killed another terrorist. By the way, they call it, how is that a coincidence? They call it domestic terrorists. Which
again,
were
is used today.
People who are doing what? Exposing the fraud. And they were saying, guys, we were deceived. We were promised that if we vote this, and by the way, communists were voted. They won one election for real. And after that, of course, they faked everything else. But so in every place, they made an effort to trick the masses, to tell to the masses, look, it will happen. Nazis did the same, remember. They grabbed the power kind of almost fair. And after that, in the name of people, you can do atrocities, which are happening right now. Marginalizing people, destroying people's lives, censorship. I see that, and I see it much more accelerated. Before communists in Romania started to censor culture, it took 7-8 years. Now it took weeks. So, I don't know. It's advancing very fast. It's true. The social engineering methods, I have to say, they are very advanced, and people who are pulling the strings are much
it's
less.
Somebody studied history. I mean, because the whole system is upgraded on how these things are done today.
There are two versions here, which I embrace one of them, but I would say two of them. Either some people are studying history, or the same people are throughout the history, not same people as individuals, but same organizations are throughout the history the same who are pulling the strings. I tend to embrace the later. And I have a lot of first-hand experiences proving that it is like that. But this is something else.
But maybe, Ava, you can say something about how the information was flowing in. I mean, how do you control information? Because the things were, just on the other side of the curtain, there was a lot of apparent freedom about how information, people could read books and so on. But I also know that you told stories about how certain books there was an illegal markets where you could access certain books, and
Yeah.
but still, I mean, why did people not revolt against the system? How was the information controlled there?
Well, it was controlled again by inside of the people in its preponderance. Because again, we're facing here the problem of statistics. People choose from a spectrum of statistics of possibilities the 3% one and say, see, it's possible. Yeah, but it's 3%. 97% is the opposite. But still, they give that as an example. Look, it's like that. So what I'm saying, censorship was inside of people. And yes, you have the freedom to go and study apparently everything. But then there appear a lot of people who started to say that book is not very good to study because it propagates some ideas or some ideals that are not according to the modern future citizen. Because everything which was done in the name of future citizens, and if you hear the propagators of those ideals, it sounds identical with the woke brigades and all the people that are propagating the modern views and the progressive views today. Identical by the letter.
Like an echo in time.
Yeah, it's like really like the nephews of those people they are getting now in power. So what I'm saying is that this was the propaganda control. So therefore, these books were talking to books because we didn't have internet or other things. These books were like not banned in the sense of burned publicly, but they were simply disappearing from the libraries because no librarian want to have such a filthy book there.
It's like pornography.
Yeah, the pornography of thoughts. And then they were saying, no, we cannot have that. And you feel, I remember how people used to feel satisfied. Today I did something very good. We took out from our library, from our local library, some debatable books, really. And if you ask them, but why do you think it's debatable? Well, didn't you hear what that name or that name said? Yeah, like important citizens of the society. But actually, those were zeros from the perspective of value in their field of science, for instance. They took over after destroying the life of other people by doing exactly that, thought police. Even novels, for instance, we have writers we were taken out from the manual. Even in my lifetime, we have authors which were removed. So previous generations studied, and then we were looking for them, and they say, no. Why? Because he has a poem where he was criticizing some ideas that the Communist Party considered this is the future, this is progressive. And why do what are you against of?
Which is the same kind of censorship you find today, where
yes,
it's like you ban
exactly.
an entire author, or now all the banning on the social media. One person has one video and you ban the entire, library of videos.
Yeah, and you go to a magazine and you want to publish your article, and they will say, yeah, but we don't want to risk. We don't want to, because your morality is doubtful. Your social credit is not so good. That was the answer. It was not like, we're not allowed by law. You are on a list of something like people tend to imagine. There was no such, there were such thing, yes. There were some extremely bad things that say that you are not allowed. But honestly, even today we have them. Yeah. So what was important here was that there was no, as a percentage, there was no important state censorship compared with the individual censorship. And therefore the information, let me give you another example. They were on TV programs that we heard news from all over the world, from all over. We knew what happens in Denmark, what happens in France, what happens in United States. But the angle, it was always like, look at these poor people. Look, there is another demonstration in Copenhagen. There is another very bad terrorist attack in Ireland. My goodness, first time after years when I went in Ireland, I was very much afraid because Ireland looked like a dump, like a place where bombs are exploding every day in every house. It was like a war zone. And I was surprised to see, okay, it's not even near that, but they gave that impression. Now, the question is, were they told exactly what to say in those news? And the sad thing is, they were not told what to say. They just accepted that if they say like that from that angle, yes, you are a good citizen. As a proof of that, they appeared constantly throughout my entire teenage years. Because I was, let's say, part of a little bit of a current of resistance I have through my father and other people around. They were protesting in a certain way, not protesting but they were not accepting it, and they were more critical about it. And as a proof, they were constantly appearing, artists, politicians is maybe too much say, leaders, syndicate leaders or something, who were saying very correct things. And they were opposing. There was the famous incident even at the top level of the Communist Party, in the middle of a live broadcast, imagine that, in the Congress of the Communist Party, multi-annual, every 4 or 5 years, I don't remember now exactly the system, they were having this very, very big Congress. And then, of course, Ceausescu would speak there, deliver a very big speech, very important speech, other people. And it was a guy who came to the microphone and started to question things in a very correct way and very critical way, and started to say, hey, guys, at the microphone there, And the interesting fact, he didn't disappear. Yes, he didn't took the microphone again for the rest of his life. I mean, for the rest
because he was shamed after, or
yes, but there was an enormous choir of people disgusted of what had just happened and saying, oh, I feel horrified. I feel a choir, it was like a nation crying of how is this possible? And what happened? A lot of voices saying, you should never broadcast live, this kind of things. What if something like this happen? And especially the young people, they are easily influenced by these radical opinions. We cannot let that happen. Well, I just heard it today, the other day on some news outlets proposing, some serious professors proposing for exactly the same inner reason, like those choir of people in the communists, proposing that some news outlets should be eradicated. Fox News or whatever, alternative media. Censorship should be even stronger on Facebook, Twitter, all the platforms that appear today. Not easy to go easy on, but stronger, they say. And the reasons, the arguments were identical. And we've seen that on TV. So that's why the censorship and the circulation of information was biased inside, most of it, not outside so much. I was listening to Radio Free Europe, the Voice of America, and all these broadcasts, which were having very critical programs on what's going on behind the curtain. But I have to say, half of the programs were disappointing because what they were trying to shovel us with, this was nothing that I see on our life, nothing that I see on our streets. It was another side of the propaganda. I've seen on one side I was living the propaganda that was the result of mass hysteria of people. And on the other side, we were receiving programs that were obviously biased by another mass hysteria of people.
But there's another paradox which you can help me to understand, because in when the wall came down, there was a lot of obvious signs that the education, what was happening in Romania and Russia and other some aspects of the education, that people were much better trained, for example, in science, the hardcore science like mathematics and physics and so on. And it's like there was a superiority, actually, intellectual superiority in some aspects.
Yeah, but this is that's why I'm saying these.
So how all these people were manipulated? If there were so many super intelligent people in Romania and Russia, and they just went along with
this is a result of the game of different forces in the development of the human consciousness. You have all kind of pluses together with all kind of minuses. So what I'm saying, in all the regimes that we build today, even the most authoritarian regime, if you study it, you will discover a lot of things that could result into some beneficial conclusions. Let me give you an example. People who have been in prison like 25, 30 years, we have a lot in Romania. You have in all kinds of countries where we had like political prisoners and so on. Because of the hardship that they have experienced there, it was noticed that they live longer than similar people from the same generation who haven't been in those hard conditions. Now, of course, the solution is for the public health not to build concentration camps. Maybe yoga concentration camps, yes, but not concentration camps as such, like the Nazis. But what I'm saying is this, that a little bit of effort and a little bit of hardship, sometimes we discover it's beneficial, but it has to be internalized. That's the problem. Yeah. So it is superficially seen today. If it comes this outer setting, it will bring us to extraordinary peaks. No, it will not bring us, because we have the problem inside. We used to joke in 1990, just after allegedly communism was gone, and there were a lot of people drumming on the streets, screaming, "Now we are free!" Now, and we can see they are the same activists from the communist time. And we used to joke at the time, we make full of communism, we will make full of capitalism as well. I mean, we will destroy it as well, because it's the people. And this was observation. You hear it in many places at those times and in those days from people who have intuition, common sense. And they were saying, yeah, the way we make full of this one, we will make full of the next one, because the fools are here. Inside. It's not, we can't fix the problems with a social system. However, we should look into the history repeating itself. So I'm not saying, there's nothing to do. Anyway, it will come inevitably to that. It's possible that it will come. It's highly possible. We have all the signs of a totalitarian regime, the likes of which we haven't seen yet, is installing worldwide. On the other hand, we have communication. We have an amount of people who are having the best conditions to awaken that is unprecedented. So, this kind of revelations, maybe they are extremely useful. So people to make correlations and start to see, wait a second, let's not repeat again the same lesson. Let's learn the lesson and move forward inside of our being, and also as a consequence outside. It's getting late now. So my suggestion is to meet again and continue our talk, because it starts to get interesting, and I think it will be frustrating to leave it here, not only for us but for our listeners.
Yeah, we only basically reached to the revolution itself, and maybe in the next podcast we can talk about what happened during the revolution in Romania and how you see the signs of something similar happening on a worldwide scale.
Yes.
In the next episode.
So I would like to ask you if you can make a conclusion after our talk now. If you want to, let's say, make the final conclusion, so we can close this one.
Yeah, I mean, my conclusion is that my personal experience from those years of the Cold War and so on, and even the perception of what happened when the happiness, now the Iron Curtain fell and all that, was kind of completed now, because you show me both the inside experience, but also that in fact this idea that a lot of these tendencies and developments are happening due to the human psychology and the lack of development of the human psychology. That you cannot blame something outside, which is also let's say leading to a spiritual idea about the human being just being a reflection, the society being just a reflection of how actually people experience themselves inside. So yeah, it's not so easy to solve, and that's also why what also take from our talk here now is, of course, in relation to what you see in the world today, you have a lot of forces on both sides, and in a way I understand both sides. They have their, let's say, empowerment from certain ideas and ideologies, but it's like, it's not gonna, even if you have great ideas, if the humanity is not ready for that jump, then doesn't matter who is winning, what side is winning. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next talk to see what we find out about the fake revolutions.
Yeah, good. So we'll continue, and thank you for now. You can write your comments below this post, below this podcast, and I would like to answer to you if you write also on the email. And we'll continue next time with deepening this journey through the path behind the Iron Curtain and seeing fake revolutions with Sahajananda. Stay tuned until next time, and remember that being alive is a continuous transformation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Continuous Transformation podcast. For more episodes, articles, and events, visit advaitananda.com.